This woman threw away a 3-year relationship, a loving family, and a future worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for one reckless night with two strangers whose names she can't even remember. And the worst part? She still believes she doesn't deserve the consequences. I'm Emma, and today on Mrs. Emma, I'm bringing you a story that will leave you absolutely speechless. This is about choices, betrayal, and the devastating price of trying to have it all. You need to hear this from beginning to end. Her name is Sabrina. 30 years old, engaged to a man who loved her unconditionally, and standing at the edge of everything she thought she wanted. But sometimes the person who destroys your life isn't an enemy or a stranger. Sometimes it's you, and that's exactly what happened to her. 3 years before everything fell apart, Sabrina met Christopher. From the very beginning, she laid everything out on the table. She wasn't going to pretend she'd lived some sheltered, innocent existence. Her 20s had been wild, full of experimentation and freedom. She'd dated extensively, lived boldly, and made no apologies for any of it. Most men would have walked away after hearing those stories, but Christopher didn't. He told her something that made her believe in second chances. He said her past didn't matter. He loved the woman she'd become, not the girl she used to be. Sweet, right? Maybe too sweet. Because Christopher wasn't just accepting. He was constantly proving to himself that he was okay with everything. Every time her past came up, he'd reassure her, almost like he needed to convince himself more than her. But Sabrina pushed those observations aside. After 3 years together, he proposed. The ring wasn't massive, but it wasn't embarrassing either. It was appropriate, sensible, just like Christopher. And she said yes. Not because she was head over heels in love, but because she was 30, and settling down felt like the logical next step. Christopher had stability. He worked in technology, made decent money, and her parents absolutely worshipped him. Her father especially had formed this incredible bond with Christopher. Every single weekend, they'd be in the garage together, working on projects, fixing things, talking about sports. Her mother would prepare these enormous Sunday dinners where Christopher would sit and listen to her father's tedious stories like they were the most captivating things he'd ever heard. It was endearing, but also slightly irritating. He tried so hard to impress them, to be perfect, to fit into their vision of the ideal son-in-law. The engagement felt right on paper. She was doing exactly what society expected of her. Getting married, building a future, becoming a responsible adult. But beneath that surface of appropriateness, something was stirring. A restlessness she couldn't quite name. Then Kara called. Kara was a friend from Sabrina's wilder days, someone who represented everything she'd supposedly left behind. And Kara had always been jealous, though she'd never admit it. She'd make these subtle comments about how boring Christopher was, how Sabrina was settling for safety instead of passion, how she was too young to be locked down. Sabrina should have shut those conversations down immediately, but instead she found herself wondering if Kara had a point. Christopher was predictable, safe, comfortable. Maybe that was exactly what she needed, but it certainly wasn't thrilling. When Kara proposed a Vegas trip with her and Haley from Sabrina's office, something inside shifted. One last adventure before becoming a married woman. One final taste of freedom before the door closed forever. Christopher wasn't excited about the idea. He got that expression he always wore when he wanted to object, but was desperately trying to be the understanding, modern boyfriend. Sabrina promised it would just be harmless fun. Shows, drinks, girl time. Nothing more. Christopher knew Kara wasn't exactly his favorite person, but Haley would be there too. Haley was this genuinely sweet woman from Sabrina's workplace, the responsible one who always made sure everyone got home safely. She was the insurance policy, the guarantee that nothing would go wrong. At least that's what everyone believed. Looking back now, Sabrina admits she should have seen the warning signs. Not because she was planning anything, but because she knew exactly who she became when Kara was around. That version of herself she thought she'd outgrown would resurface, wild and impulsive and dangerous. But she was engaged now, committed, and she genuinely believed she was beyond all that. She convinced herself she could handle one weekend without everything collapsing. The entire time she was packing her suitcase, Christopher hovered nearby, supportive but withdrawn. He kept suggesting maybe they should take a trip together instead. Maybe they could plan something romantic, just the two of them. But Sabrina was determined. She felt like once she became a wife, these opportunities would vanish forever. She'd never again be young and carefree and untethered. She kept reminding herself that engaged women went on bachelorette parties all the time. This was just an early celebration, completely normal, completely harmless. Christopher drove her to the airport. He kissed her goodbye, told her to have fun but stay safe. The guilt she experienced watching him drive away should have been a massive red flag, but she buried it beneath excitement and anticipation. The Vegas trip began exactly as expected. Kara immediately pushing for shots at the airport bar at 2 in the afternoon. Haley rolling her eyes, caught between amusement and concern. And Sabrina right in the middle, trying to be both the fun friend and the responsible engaged woman. During the entire flight, Kara wouldn't stop making comments. This was Sabrina's last chance to truly live before being trapped forever. Every time Sabrina mentioned Christopher or wedding plans, Kara would make this face like she was discussing a prison sentence instead of a marriage. And honestly, it was getting under Sabrina's skin. Not because she agreed, but because Kara was relentless. The comments were constant, chipping away at her certainty. When they reached the hotel, Kara had already researched everything. Clubs, bars, lounges, a complete itinerary designed for maximum chaos. Haley seemed exhausted before they even started, but Sabrina figured one wild night wouldn't hurt anyone. They got dressed up, went to dinner, had drinks. And for the first time in months, Sabrina felt genuinely attractive. Not that Christopher didn't make her feel beautiful, but this was different. This was about reclaiming a part of herself she'd set aside. The first bar was normal Vegas fare, but then Kara insisted on this upscale lounge, and that's where everything shifted. There were men there, successful, well-dressed, obviously wealthy, and they were clearly interested. Kara immediately began flirting, which was typical behavior for her. But then these men started buying drinks, asking questions, showing genuine interest. Sabrina should have mentioned Christopher immediately, should have established clear boundaries from the start. But the attention felt incredible. And these men weren't typical Vegas creeps. They were charming, intelligent, funny. One of them kept complimenting Sabrina, telling her how stunning she was, expressing disbelief that someone like her could possibly be single. She corrected him, explained she was engaged, and instead of backing off respectfully, he just smiled and said that made her even more intriguing. That should have been her cue to leave. That should have been the moment she walked away. But she was feeling good from the alcohol and the validation, and it seemed harmless enough. Haley was getting visibly uncomfortable, but Kara was thriving on the attention. These men eventually mentioned they had a suite upstairs. They said the view was spectacular, and they'd love to have the ladies up for more drinks. Kara immediately agreed. And honestly, part of Sabrina was curious too. The suite sounded luxurious, and what was the harm in just hanging out? She knew the risks. She understood what could happen. But she didn't want to be the boring friend who destroyed everyone's evening, so when they asked again, she said yes. In her mind, she was just having fun. She wasn't planning anything inappropriate. She was engaged. She loved Christopher. This was just one last night of excitement before her life became predictable forever. But somewhere deep inside, she knew she was lying to herself. There was something about the attention, the way these men looked at her, that made her feel alive in ways she hadn't experienced in years. The suite was absolutely absurd. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire strip, expensive furniture, drinks already prepared, music playing softly. These men had clearly orchestrated this scenario before. They knew exactly what they were doing. Haley sat on the couch looking miserable, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Kara was already comfortable, flirting aggressively with the taller guy who'd been buying her drinks all evening. And Sabrina was caught in between, trying to appear relaxed while feeling this strange energy in the room. The men were smooth, practiced, making them feel special and unique. They asked about jobs, relationships, dreams. When Sabrina mentioned her engagement, they didn't retreat. They became more interested. The one focusing on her said something about engagement being just a piece of paper, about her still being free to make her own choices, to live her own life. It was such an obvious manipulation. But combined with the alcohol, the atmosphere, the way he was looking at her, it felt profound. Like he was giving her permission to be herself instead of just Christopher's future wife. Haley kept trying to catch Sabrina's eye, silently begging to leave. But Kara was having the time of her life. These men represented everything Christopher wasn't. Spontaneous, exciting, slightly dangerous. They made Sabrina feel like she was missing out by settling down so young, like marriage would mean giving up a fundamental part of herself. The night kept escalating. Drinks kept flowing. At some point, Kara disappeared into one of the bedrooms with her guy. The music got louder. The conversation became more personal, more intimate. Haley was practically pleading now. She kept saying they should return to their room, that this was spiraling out of control. But Sabrina told her to leave if she wanted to, that she was having fun and would be fine. The expression on Haley's face before she left will haunt Sabrina forever. Disappointment mixed with genuine worry, like she could see exactly what was about to happen and was powerless to prevent it. But Sabrina was too far gone to care about judgment. After Haley left, it was just Sabrina and these two men, and the energy completely transformed. They became more physical, more forward. And instead of stopping it, she let it happen. She told herself she was just having fun, just living a little before marriage made her boring and predictable. But she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And she did it anyway. Because in that moment, she wanted to feel wanted, desired, powerful. She wanted to feel like she was still the kind of woman who could drive men wild, who still had choices, who wasn't just someone's future wife. And she convinced herself that what Christopher didn't know couldn't hurt him. The next morning, Sabrina woke up in that hotel suite feeling like she'd been demolished. Not just from alcohol, but from the crushing weight of what she'd done. The men were gone, probably left hours earlier. She was alone in this massive bed, trying to piece together exactly what had happened. The details were fuzzy, thankfully. But she remembered enough to know she'd completely destroyed her relationship. She got dressed quickly and went back to their room, hoping Haley would be asleep and she could pretend nothing had happened. But Haley was awake, sitting on her bed, looking at Sabrina like she was a complete stranger. She didn't say anything initially, just stared with this expression Sabrina had never seen before. When Haley finally spoke, she asked if Sabrina was okay. And Sabrina could tell she was offering a chance to explain, to make it sound less catastrophic than it was. But Sabrina couldn't even meet her eyes. She mumbled something about drinking too much and went to shower. The remainder of the trip was unbearably awkward. Kara was bragging about her night, completely oblivious to the tension. Haley barely spoke to Sabrina, and when she did, the responses were cold and brief. Sabrina tried acting normal, but she felt like she was disintegrating inside. Not from guilt exactly. She was still telling herself it was just one night, just a mistake that didn't mean anything. But she hated that Haley was judging her. The flight home was torture. She kept thinking about Christopher, about how he'd probably planned something nice for her return, how he'd want to hear about the trip. She practiced lies, invented stories about shows they'd supposedly seen and restaurants they'd visited. She convinced herself that if she could just survive the next few days, everything would return to normal. Christopher would never know, and what he didn't know couldn't destroy their relationship. But the moment she walked into their apartment and saw Christopher's face, she knew something was catastrophically wrong. He looked different, distant, like he was seeing her for the first time. At first, she thought maybe he was tired from work. But then he said Haley had called him. Sabrina's heart completely stopped. That backstabbing traitor had called her fiancé and told him everything. Haley had called from the airport before they'd even left Vegas and explained exactly what she'd witnessed. Sabrina tried denying it initially, tried claiming Haley was exaggerating, that nothing significant had happened. But Christopher just looked at her with complete disappointment, like she'd confirmed everything he'd always feared about her. He didn't yell, didn't scream, didn't throw things. He just sat down on their couch and said he needed time to think. That silence was worse than any fight could have been. Sabrina tried explaining, tried making him understand that it didn't mean anything, that she was drunk and confused, that it was just a stupid mistake. But he wasn't listening. He kept asking questions about what exactly happened, and she could see him dying a little more with each answer she provided. The worst part was how calm he remained, how reasonable and mature. It somehow made her feel even more terrible. The next few weeks were absolute hell, but not in the expected way. Christopher didn't kick her out or create some dramatic scene. Instead, he went completely cold. He slept in the guest room, barely spoke to her, and when he did, it was about practical matters like bills or canceling wedding arrangements. Sabrina kept trying to get him to talk, to fight, anything but this horrible silence. She'd cry, she'd beg, she'd promise it would never happen again. But he just looked at her like she was someone he used to know. The worst part was how maturely he was handling everything. Sabrina almost wanted him to be angry, to call her names, to give her something to push back against. But he just quietly started canceling wedding vendors and returning deposits. He moved out of their bedroom permanently and started searching for his own apartment. She thought maybe if she gave him space, he'd come around. But instead, he just became more distant. Then she discovered he'd told his parents what happened, and they were devastated. These people who'd treated her like a daughter for 3 years suddenly couldn't even look at her. His mother, who'd been so excited about planning the wedding, couldn't even be in the same room anymore. It was humiliating, but Sabrina tried convincing herself they were just being dramatic and judgmental. About a month after Vegas, Christopher moved out completely. He packed his belongings while she was at work, left his key on the kitchen counter, and that was it. No big confrontation, no final fight. Just gone. Sabrina came home to an apartment that felt completely empty, even though most of the furniture remained. She tried calling, texting, even showed up at his new place once. But he made it clear he was done. He wasn't cruel about it, but he was final. The engagement was over, and so were they. Sabrina was furious. Not at herself, but at everyone else. She was angry at Haley for betraying her and telling Christopher. Angry at Christopher for not fighting for them. Angry at his parents for judging her so harshly. She convinced herself that if he really loved her, he would have forgiven her. She told herself that everyone makes mistakes, and if he couldn't handle one bad night, then maybe he wasn't the right person anyway. But deep down, she knew she'd destroyed the best thing in her life, and she didn't know how to live with that reality. She started going out more, trying to prove to herself that she was still desirable, still valuable. She dated a few guys, nothing serious, just trying to fill the void Christopher had left. But none of them made her feel the way he had, and that just intensified her anger. 2 months after everything fell apart, Sabrina thought she was finally starting to move forward. She'd been seeing this guy from work, nothing serious, but it felt nice to be wanted again. But then she ran into Christopher's mother at the hardware store, and everything changed. She looked older, sadder. And when she saw Sabrina, she didn't walk away or ignore her like expected. Instead, she came directly up and asked what had really happened. She said Christopher had been completely devastated but wouldn't give them details. And as his mother, she needed to understand why their family had been torn apart. Sabrina doesn't know why she told the truth. Maybe she was exhausted from carrying it alone. Maybe she wanted someone to understand that it wasn't as simple as everyone made it seem. But she told her everything. About Vegas, about the men, about what she'd done. She expected anger, yelling, condemnation. Instead, Christopher's mother just looked incredibly sad and said she wasn't surprised. She said they'd hoped Sabrina was ready to settle down and be a good wife, but they'd always worried about her past catching up with her. Then she said something that absolutely destroyed Sabrina. They'd been planning to give them money for a house down payment, the same amount they'd given Christopher's sister when she married. A significant amount that would have changed their entire future. But now they were donating it to charity instead, because they didn't want to support what she called Sabrina's lifestyle choices. Sabrina completely lost it. She started yelling right there in the hardware store, telling her she had no right to judge, that one mistake didn't define who she was as a person. But Christopher's mother just stood there, calm and disappointed, and said that actions have consequences, and Sabrina was old enough to know better. 2 days later, Sabrina received angry texts from her sister. Somehow, word had gotten back to her parents about what really happened in Vegas. They were furious, humiliated, and completely done with her. Her father, who'd always been her defender no matter what, told her she'd thrown away the best man she'd ever find for a meaningless night with strangers. Her mother said she was embarrassed to tell her friends why the wedding was suddenly canceled. Even her sister, who'd always been competitive and slightly jealous, was disgusted. She said Sabrina had proven she was exactly the kind of person she'd always suspected. selfish and destructive and incapable of appreciating good things. The worst part was everyone acting like she was some kind of monster. Yes, she'd made a mistake, but people cheat all the time and work things out. Couples go to therapy, they forgive, they move forward. She wasn't the first woman to have a moment of weakness, and she wouldn't be the last. But everyone was treating her like she'd committed some unforgivable sin. She was angry at all of them. At Christopher for being so rigid and unforgiving. At his parents for being so judgmental and self-righteous. At her own family for abandoning her when she needed their support most. But she was angriest at herself for caring what any of them thought. She'd spent 3 years trying to be the perfect fiancé, the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect future wife. And for what? One night of fun, one moment of feeling alive and desired, and suddenly she was the villain in everyone's story. It wasn't fair, and she was exhausted from pretending she deserved all this judgment and punishment. 8 months later, Sabrina moved to Houston to start completely over. She couldn't stay in a place where everyone knew her business, where she couldn't go anywhere without running into someone who looked at her with pity or disgust. She told herself she was better off without all of them, that she deserved people who wouldn't judge her so harshly for one mistake. She got a new job, a new apartment, started fresh where nobody knew about Vegas or Christopher or any of it. But late at night in her new place, she sometimes wondered if they were all right. If she'd thrown away something real and valuable for something meaningless and temporary. If she'd always be the kind of person who destroyed good things because she couldn't appreciate them while she had them, because she always wanted something more, something different, something exciting. But she pushed those thoughts away because accepting them would mean admitting she was everything they said she was, and she wasn't ready to do that. She still believed she deserved better than their judgment, better than Christopher's inability to forgive, better than all of it. 6 months into her new life in Houston, Sabrina was finally feeling like herself again. She'd made new friends, started dating again, and almost never thought about Christopher or that whole disaster anymore. But then she got a Facebook notification that changed everything. Christopher had gotten engaged. Not just engaged, but to someone she recognized. Sarah, this girl who'd worked at the coffee shop they used to visit together. She was everything Sabrina wasn't. Sweet, innocent, probably never had a wild past or made any serious mistakes. The kind of girl who'd never even think about cheating, let alone actually do it. And seeing them together, looking so happy and perfect, made Sabrina realize that while she'd been starting over, he'd been moving on. Really moving on in a way that made it clear she'd never meant as much to him as she thought she had. What really devastated her was seeing how his family had embraced Sarah completely. His mother was already posting about wedding planning. His sister was calling her the perfect addition to their family. All the things they'd said about Sabrina once upon a time, they were now saying about Sarah. And probably meaning it this time. That's when it really hit her. She hadn't just lost Christopher, she'd lost his entire family, their money, their support, their love. She'd lost the future they'd planned, the house they would have bought, the life they would have built. And for what? 2 guys whose names she couldn't even remember. One night that meant absolutely nothing. But even now, even knowing all that, she can't bring herself to regret it completely. Because that night in Vegas, for just a few hours, she felt truly alive and free and powerful. And maybe, in her mind, that was worth more than a lifetime of being the perfect wife to someone who would never really understand her anyway. This story absolutely breaks my heart, but not in the way you might think. Because Sabrina's tragedy isn't what happened in Vegas. It's that even after losing everything, after destroying a man who genuinely loved her, after alienating her entire family, after watching Christopher find happiness with someone else, she still can't fully regret her choice. She still believes that moment of feeling alive was worth the devastation she caused, and that more than anything else shows the real cost of selfishness. Not the immediate consequences, but the inability to ever truly learn from them. Some people lose everything and grow from it. Others lose everything and convince themselves they were right all along. Sabrina chose the latter, and that choice will follow her for the rest of her life. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the choices we make and the consequences we live with, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Mrs. Emma so you never miss another story that makes you think, makes you feel, and reminds you that our choices define us far more than our intentions ever will. I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next story. Remember, the person you become is built on the choices you make when nobody's watching. Choose wisely.